All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CRPO Council Elections Pre-Candidacy webinar. Thank you for registering today and for your interest in our election process and the role of council members. We hope that this presentation provides you with some information about regulatory colleges and how we function. We do have an election cycle that has just opened up. You would have received the notice of nominations on March 1st by email. The election cycle this year is significant. We're seeking to fill 2 positions in District 7, which is the Toronto district, as well as the District 8, which is the All-Ontario district. To begin with, we'll present on the legislation, but first we're going to go over a couple of the Zoom rules. Just a reminder to everyone, I'm sure everyone is familiar with Zoom these days, but please stay muted and disable your video during the presentation. And if you would like to contribute to the discussion or ask a question, please make use of the integrated Zoom chat function, and we will get to those questions at the end of the presentation today. Let's look at a bit of an agenda to get us started. We'll present on, like I said, the legislation that governs the CRPO and the role of council members in fulfilling the college's mandate. We will also hear from 2 of our current council members who will speak to their experiences on council. We have Andrew Benedetto from District 7 joining us, and we have Miranda Monastero joining us, who represents District 5. So we're grateful and thankful to have them joining us today. As for myself, my name is Amy Fournier. I've been with the CRPO since February 2018. I primarily support council and the executive committees, and I administer the annual elections. So let's get started. What does CRPO Council do? In today's session, we're going to explore the legislation and the sources of authority that the CRPO uses to direct its work. CRPO regulates registered psychotherapists in Ontario with a duty to serve and protect the public interest. Sometimes this can feel confusing because council creates policy around matters that have an impact on the profession, not just members of the public. Some ways that the CRPO fulfills its mandate is by maintaining a public register, investigating complaints against registered psychotherapists, maintaining registration requirements, just to name a few. It's important to note that in every regulated profession, there needs to be a balance of education programs that teach practitioners how to provide care, professional associations that work in the interest of the healthcare providers, and regulators like the CRPO that work in the interest of the public. And it's by having these 3 strong corners of the public sector that a safe, excellent healthcare profession can do the work that it does. So we engage with these stakeholders regularly in a number of ways, primarily by providing presentations to education programs, by meeting regularly with associations and education programs to share information. In this first section, I'm going to provide some big picture information on the legislation that governs regulatory colleges and how the colleges function. So illustrated on this graph, these are the sources of authority that the CRPO uses to direct its work. The Regulated Health Professions Act, or the RHPA, is at the top, which is the common legislative framework for all regulated health professions in the province, followed by the profession-specific acts, and in our case, the Psychotherapy Act. These profession-specific acts protect the use of title, they define scope of practice, excuse me, and explicitly state any profession-specific controlled acts. Next, we have regulations and bylaws. These are written by council and committees. We have 3 regulations currently: the Professional Misconduct Regulation, Quality Assurance, and Registration. And right at the bottom of the pyramid, we have the Professional Practice Standards, Policies, and Guidelines. The development of standards of practice is a requirement in the Regulated Health Professions Act, with a focus on items that are rooted in legislation like confidentiality, consent, and record keeping. And as I mentioned, these are developed by committees. Over the next few slides, we'll explore the RHPA and the code a little bit more. So as I noted, the RHPA is the common legislative framework for all the regulated health professions in the province of Ontario. There are currently 26 colleges that regulate 29 distinct professions. That's about 400,000 regulated health professionals in Ontario. The overall mandate of the RHPA is the duty to serve and protect the public interest. The RHPA itself is very lengthy and detailed and covers several themes, with these being the major themes highlighted on the slide. And again, you can see the overarching theme of public protection. The Health Professions Procedural Code is Schedule 2 of the Regulated Health Professions Act. And what the code does is it sets out the more practical rules for colleges to follow. So the Health Professions Procedural Code, taken with the Regulated Health Professions Act, can be summarized into 5 broader objectives, which we have noted on this slide. These rules help to ensure that health professional regulation in Ontario is open, transparent, accessible, and fair to those who are seeking to become regulated health professionals. Also for the regulated health professionals who are governed by the health regulatory colleges, and in particular for patients or clients and members of the public who the legislative framework is meant to protect. Moving on to the Psychotherapy Act. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Psychotherapy Act. It includes provisions such as use of title, scope of practice, and any controlled acts that the professions are authorized to perform. Controlled acts are particularly high-risk acts that can cause harm if they are done by unqualified persons. Other controlled acts include communicating a diagnosis, prescribing drugs, managing labor. There are 14 defined controlled acts, and RPs only have access to the controlled act of psychotherapy. On to regulations and bylaws. CRPO's regulations can be placed into 3 broader categories that are noted here. Restrictive regulations, such as the registration or entry to practice regulation, reactive regulation, the professional misconduct regulation, and proactive regulation, being the quality assurance regulation. The regulation process itself can be quite lengthy, and it can take months or years for cabinet to approve the regulations. So these are the three that exist currently. Regarding bylaws, the complete CRPO bylaws can be found on our website and primarily deal with internal administrative matters. This flowchart here just simply illustrates the bylaw making or bylaw changing process. Bylaws are often circulated for public consultation for 60 days, but it is not a requirement. And ministry approval of bylaws is not required. You'll also find bylaws regarding the elections, fees, committee composition, information that is contained on the public register. So lots of information covered in our bylaws. And moving on to standards, policies, and guidelines. Council also develops and monitors regulations, policies, and business systems for the CRPO. Policies are the primary tool for Council to direct the college and protect the public, and they set out the expectations of practitioners that enhance public protection. Typically, policies address either recurring areas of challenge for practitioners or emerging areas of priority. For example, social media or use of technology. To ensure that policies are relevant and helpful, they're developed through a very rigorous process. And the purpose of them being to provide direction. On to governance rules and structures. Council makes decisions that affect how psychotherapists practice and are regulated in the province, again, with that focus on the public interest. Using the framework established by the Regulated Health Professions Act and the Code, the college regulates by establishing registration and renewal requirements, developing standards, promoting ongoing competence and professional development through the quality assurance program, investigating complaints. The majority of the work of council is done at the committee level. Committees do the work involved in developing and drafting policies, guidelines, standards of practice, and once these documents are finalized by committees, they're then presented to council for feedback and approval. The CRPO has 9 committees, which are all listed here. Most committees meet for plenary meetings 4 to 6 times a year. Committee members also participate in panels as required to review more complex and irregular applications for registration and dealing with complaints about a member's professional conduct or competence, among other concerns. We'll speak a little bit more about panel and meeting preparation in a few more slides. When it comes to the CRPO's approach to regulation, we've adopted the right touch approach, which was developed by the Professional Standards Authority in the UK. And right touch regulation means understanding the problem before jumping to the solution. It makes sure that the level of regulation is proportionate to the level of risk to the public. There are 8 elements that sit at the heart of right touch regulation, and they are all noted here, from identifying the problem before the solution to reviewing and responding to changes in the profession. I'm going to speak a little bit about the relationship of council with staff, in particular, the registrar. The registrar is council's official link to the day-to-day operations of the college and its staff. The performance of the registrar is synonymous with council's performance. The registrar is the council's only employee, and it is the role of the registrar to effectively manage staff and deliver the objectives of council. The president's role is a leadership role that's defined in the bylaws. The president is elected by council. Their term is a one-year term. The president is expected to demonstrate leadership, leading by example, and being prepared for meetings, supporting council and non-council members, listening to their concerns, for example, facilitating council and executive committee meetings by preparing agendas. The president is a CRPO spokesperson. The registrar and the president are official spokespersons for CRPO. This offers more consistent messaging. The link between the president is really the link between council and the registrar. The president has no individual authority. They implement the decisions that are made by council and ensure that policies and the strategic plan, for example, are implemented and managed. And as I mentioned, they're elected by fellow council members, and the term of office is 1 year. And council's role ultimately is to provide strategic direction, manage risk, and provide an oversight role. It's important to remember that in any organization where governance is divided from operations, there needs to be a healthy fence between staff and council members. Part of what this means is that in order to function well, council members need to steer or set the course of the organization, and staff members need to row or do the work of how to get there. Another part of what this means is that there needs to be a healthy fence between council members and staff. Staff need to be trusted to do their work effectively based on the big picture vision that's created by council, and council needs to be supported by staff to do their jobs effectively. A large part of board member role involves fiduciary obligations. Fiduciary duty is undivided loyalty to the regulator and to its mandate and the mandate of the committees on which you sit. Part of this is appropriately dealing with conflicts of interest as they arise, keeping all documents confidential, and engaging in appropriate conduct as a council member with diligence, respect. This also includes being prepared for meetings by reviewing materials in advance, identifying and considering the issues, and participating in meeting discussion. One of the most fundamental fiduciary duties is that council and committee members cannot act when in a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest arises when a council or committee member has a competing consideration that could reasonably affect their ability to make a decision based solely on the public interest mandate of the CRPO. Conflicts of interest can take on many different forms, and it's always best to discuss, disclose, and declare with the appropriate staff person or committee chair. The Code of Conduct, which is a Schedule 3 of the CRPO bylaws, applies to all council and committee members and includes paying attention and being prepared, not making up your mind before arriving to a meeting, preserving confidentiality, and again, with the declaring of the conflicts of interest. There are a set of competencies that council members are expected to continuously be improving on. We certainly don't expect all new council members to possess all of the competencies that are defined on the competency matrix, which is included in the candidate nomination package. And one of the ways that council members develop these competencies is through the education that is offered at council and committee meetings throughout the year. Some of the defined competencies on the competency matrix include understanding of governance, financial understanding, risk management, critical thinking, and new this year, nominees who are putting their name forward for election must complete the CRPO Council competency document that is included in the package. And this competency matrix helps give CRPO information on your knowledge, skills, and experience, and helps us to identify where more education or support is required. I am going to hand it over to Andrew Benedetto to provide a little bit of firsthand experience on being a CRPO council member. So Andrew, if you're ready to unmute.
Great, thank you. Amy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I'm Andrew Benedetto. I've been on council and its predecessor, the Transitional Council, for almost about 8.5 years. And so I'll start with sort of, Amy asked us some questions, so I'll start with what led me to get involved with CRPO. And I followed the development of regulation of psychotherapy as an observer when public meetings started in about 2010. I was keen to be part of the decision-making around how the regulations and policy were evolving. And in the end of 2013, I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the Transitional Council. And then the council was constituted in 2015 when the Psychotherapy Act was passed. And then I was elected in 2016 to council. I came to the profession of psychotherapy as a second career, training in a small training program. And I thought it was important, to the extent that I could add my voice, to see that the regulatory environment was being set up to protect the public space, or health space rather, for the range of modalities that are psychotherapy. So what do I most enjoy about being a council member? It really is working with other council members in discussion regarding policies, as well as the deliberations on panels that Amy was talking about earlier, as well as staff, absolutely for sure, the staff. So in this work, I think CRPO has brought recognition to psychotherapy as a profession, if it wasn't always so clear that it was a profession. And this benefits the public members and the public and members of the profession as well. So I look back in 2021 to see how much time I've spent on council. And on balance, I'd say it's about 2.5 to 3 days each month in meetings, whether those are shorter meetings, half day or longer day meetings. That doesn't include my preparation time. I know that there's a document on the CRPO website that looks at the amount of time for various committees and things. And I know from my perspective, for the committees I sit on, that's a fairly good representation of what the time is. Over the years, the time commitment has been more when I've either sat on task groups, executive committee, which I have done since 2015 or 2016, and as president, which I was for 3 years. The move to Zoom was, I think, the college was really well prepared to move to Zoom, which was great. I definitely like not commuting. It saves a lot of time and energy. I think the downside is that you don't get to talk to people at coffee breaks and at lunch. So one of the things we've done in the registration committee is that we open up the meeting or we open up the Zoom session 10 minutes early. So whoever wants to join can join and sort of say, hi, how are you doing? and so on. So that's kind of a way to address that. The good thing about Zoom to say is that I think it really improves access for people, council members across Ontario. We also have non-council members as well. So I think the move to the virtual environment has been really, really quite tremendous. In terms of challenges I faced as a council member, I'll talk about the challenge and then the response, I think. One was the learning curve. There was a lot of information to learn. I think over time I have become more proficient with the work of the college. I think what's great is that in recent years, the college has orientation sessions for each of the committees and for panels and so on. So I think that's been a great way to get people up to speed, and so that's been great. One of the other challenges, I don't know if it's quite a challenge, but I'll say is really noting the responsibility of being on council, particularly when you're sitting on panels. As Amy was describing, for example, registration panels, where we'll look at applicants where things might not fit the regulation exactly, where there might be gaps and things. And so I think we realized that on panels we are, there's a lot of responsibility. This is about people's livelihoods and their careers. So just to sort of point out that that's certainly an important aspect of this. And then the third thing I'd say is working in groups. And one of the things that, in any group, there's always difference of opinions. The college has been really great at promoting consensus decision-making. We actually recently had training on that. I know that as a chair, I'm always inclined to look at consensus decision-making. I've heard from public members over the years that because half of council are psychotherapists, people are good at listening, asking questions, and discussing toward coming to consensus. So yeah, it's been a very great work environment. And after 8.5 years, I look forward to sort of passing the torch, as it were. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate your perspective. And now we can pass it on to Miranda Monastero, who is an RP on council, and she is in District 5. So take it away, Miranda.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So like Andrew, there was some questions that you guys asked us to answer, and I just wanted to let everyone know I've been on the council for almost 4 years now. I was on for, it's a 3-year stint, and then I was reelected last June to do another 3 years. This is like Andrew, my second profession. I was in advertising before this, and then I've been a therapist in private practice for approximately 11 years now. So I guess what I enjoy most about being a council member is the work I do with other professionals and public members to improve and make possible a strong regulatory body that is fair and equal and supportive. I haven't really enjoyed learning in depth about the reasons and the logic behind why regulations are put in place and how they maintain a level of safety for the public, especially in a profession that often deals with sensitive issues. So I would say that my work with CRPO has provided me with another perspective that has enriched my view of what I do for a living and my private practice as a whole. It seemed my journey to getting involved with CRPO was actually interesting. It actually began in a place of fear, which I had instilled in myself. A few years back, I was randomly selected to take part in a peer and practice review. And before the process started, I was actually very nervous. But it was really great experience to go through, because throughout I discovered that it was actually very supportive. And it prompted me to really take a look at my practice and solidify what I wanted to ensure and how I was practicing my chosen profession, and that it was done in a completely ethical way. So after I went through the PPR, I decided to run for council. And when elections came up, I became more interested in gaining an understanding of the legislation and the council mandate. So What started as an experience in fear for me ended up to be a very positive journey. The amount of time I would say I spend on my council duties varies from month to month, depending on how many meetings are scheduled within that month. Like Andrew, I would say that the guidelines on the site are very accurate. I sit on 3 different committees, and at any given time, I'll be spending approximately 10 to 20 hours depending on the month. And these are taken up by a combination of preparation for the meetings and then of course actually sitting in the meetings themselves. So I would say in terms of challenges, I don't look at them as challenges. There have been a great many opportunities, and like Andrew, the growing curves that I have had the pleasure to experience has been the curve to grow and understand and respect the standards that have been put in place and why they are put there. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Miranda, for your perspective. Okay, so that brings us to the 2022 election cycle, which, as I noted off the top of the presentation, has just opened up. So our nomination period opened on March 1st. You would have received an email about that. I've also popped a link into the chat that links to that time commitment document that we have been referring to that could be useful. So the districts, as I noted at the top, are District 7, the Toronto district. We are seeking 2 candidates, and for the District 8, the Ontario district, 1 candidate will be elected. The nomination package is on our website and is linked in the email that was sent out last week. There are a couple of new sections to completing the candidate nomination package this year. Primarily, what you will want to make note of is the completion of the pre-candidacy modules and competencies. So the competency self-assessment that I noted earlier is included in the package. It asks nominations to respond to the matrix and indicate their sort of level of skill and knowledge on things like governance, health systems knowledge, and that sort of knowledge that is good to bring to the table. The pre-candidacy modules were covered in the first part of this presentation. So if you have made it this far, then you've completed the pre-candidacy modules. They're also available on our website in PDF, and they are available on our YouTube channel as a narrated video. And there is also a brief pre-candidacy questionnaire also introduced this year, and that's to meet the college performance measurement framework components that the Ministry of Health has set in place. So those are new this year, and if you require any support with accessing the forms or completing them, or if you have any questions at all, when you're completing the package and any of the new components this year, then certainly send an email to elections@crpo.ca. The election schedule for this year also noted on our website, but I wanted to remind folks here. The nomination deadline, so the deadline for you to submit your nomination package is March 31st at noon. So please get those into elections@crpo.ca. And sometime between April 1st and 7th, the nominations will be confirmed with the candidates. And on April 29th, that is when the online election opens for voting. So that's when we send out the candidate platforms and all of the voter information. And the last day to vote being May 30th. We are happy to open up the floor to any questions that you have. We received one in the chat about whether the time commitment was during office hours, 9 to 5. And yes, those are the hours that we use as well to schedule meetings for committees and panels. And future council meeting dates are always noted on our website, but they do take place during working hours. So if there are any questions, please just drop them in the chat. Okay, the question that we have in the chat here is, how does the district that one is nominated to represent impact the role on council? I would say very little. The electoral boundaries are quite, they don't mean very much. It's just a way of keeping people sort of the area in which you primarily practice. That's how we determine what district that you're in. Andrew, did you want to speak to whether yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Yeah, this is one of those ones I think that was confusing for many of us with the origination of the college, and I see Deb has joined us too. This is a comment I'll make that I've heard over the years, and believe that once you're at the council table, it doesn't really matter that you are a psychotherapist or not, but everybody around the table is equal and everybody's voice is equal. So I think sometimes because we have this election process that's based on districts, people might think they're representing individuals or carrying the voice of those people in the district, but that's not the case. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. If I could just add to that. Hello, everybody. Just popping in to note that not only is that the case that the equal voice is a really key piece of how the council works, the fact that you're from different districts allows you to bring perspectives. You always bring perspectives and not voices. And so certainly, we work hard to try and ensure that we're considering how regulation impacts service provision, and we recognize that service provision is different from one area of the province to the next. And so if you're from the north or you're from a remote or rural area, for example, you're going to have a different perspective on referral and circle of care and ideas around how that works might be from somebody who practices in downtown Toronto, for example. And so not only do we have the council voices at the table, at the committees, we have a good number. In fact, we have 16 non-elected professional members who also bring that diversity of perspective. And so we look for as much coverage as we can from a geography perspective, because we do regulate the whole province. But Andrew and Amy are absolutely correct. It doesn't impact your weight or your role or any of the work that you would be asked to do at council.
Thank you, Deb and Andrew. Last call for questions.
See, there's a question about the level of detail that's being asked for when completing the competency matrix. I can speak to that if you like.
Sure.
So the competency matrices, as I think Amy was pretty good about pointing out at the beginning, are really about screening people into participating on council and committees, not screening out. And so what we'd ask is that you be as candid as you can be in areas where you feel particularly strong. The more you can provide, the better. That's great, because it really does help in determining where you would be able to contribute from a committee perspective or a governance perspective. Where you don't have experience, it's more a flag for council and for staff around education. And certainly we look at individual education needs when we're orienting new council and committee members, but then there's ongoing professional education that the council as a whole is asked to complete, and that we plan on sort of an annual cycle. And so hearing from people about where they feel like they could use a little bit of a top up is really helpful. And certainly we're very conscious of the need to make sure that people feel well supported. Regulatory work is pretty specific, and unless you've been involved in this kind of thing before, and or if you've been on a board where you've worked in that kind of governance model, it's quite expected and understandable that you would need some support in achieving the competencies that we're hoping to have collectively. And I think the collectively piece is also important. Council is the sum of its parts. And so the different skills and experiences that people bring to the table all get, worked in together to make sure that we have the right kind of skills and experience at the table.
Thank you, Deb. We have a question. Are the responsibilities different than a non-council member? The responsibilities are not different. I think non-council and full council members are expected to meet the same, confidentiality, fiduciary duties that is consistent across the board. The one piece where it is different is non-council members don't sit at the council table. So they're not approving bylaw changes, things that come forward to council. They don't participate in council meetings. They're appointed to specific committees, so they only participate in the committee meetings or panels that they're appointed to. So that would add on, if you were elected as a full council member, you would sit on likely more than one committee and full council, so the requirement to attend council meetings as well. So I think that's the only piece where it's different.
And discipline and fitness to practice would be the other place. If you're on council, you're automatically part of the discipline and fitness to practice committees, which means that when we run hearings, you would be, as a council member, asked eventually to participate in a discipline or fitness to practice hearing, versus when you're a committee appointee, you wouldn't be.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Deb. Another question that we have is, if elected, when is the start date? That is a great question. So as I noted in the timetable, the voting closes on May 30th. The individuals who are elected as of May 30th will begin, sorry, I need to look at my chart over here, at the June 23rd meeting of council is when the individual would be officially part of council. Andrew?
I have a question, Amy. Yeah,
Sure.
So can you comment on, or maybe Deb can comment on, the virtual versus in-person element? Because, we've sort of been in this world for the last 2 years where CRPO has been really very effective virtually. Is that going to continue?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Happy to answer that. The goal is to continue to offer hybrid meetings so that people who are unable to come in for either travel or other reasons would be able to participate in council meetings regularly. Certainly, if we do an education session where in-person participation would be helpful, we would encourage people to participate in that way. And I would imagine when we get back to strategic planning and those kinds of retreat from business activities, that we would hope and expect people would come in person. I think, as Andrew's noted, we were pretty well set to move remote and had already started to do panel and some committee meetings via this medium even before we were mandated to. And so I think we'll continue to do that as well. Certainly our experience has been that it's really allowed us to spread out and make sure that we do have representation. Although the geography piece isn't critical, we do want to be able to invite and include and have participation barrier-free as much as possible for as many people as possible. And so that is absolutely the intent to continue.
Great, thank you, Deb. Another question in the chat, can you please comment on how financial compensation works for these roles?
Sure.
So
sorry, you want to go ahead, Amy? Forgive me.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. You're probably better at it than I am. Go ahead.
I'm actually going to put a link into the chat, linking you to the per diem and honoraria remuneration of council and committee members. It breaks down the rates for extended travel time, preparation, attendance at meetings. So I'll just put that in the chat for you to click on and take a read through, and that will inform you how our professional members are compensated. Are there any other questions. If you have questions that maybe come to you after, please feel free to email them to elections@crpo.ca. I'm happy to help you complete your package or whatever questions you have in relation to elections. So if there is nothing else, I would like to thank Andrew and Miranda for agreeing to participate today. I find that the value that the professional members add to these webinars is really valuable. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to Deb for stepping in and helping us with some questions. And this session is recorded, so we will post it for those who were not able to attend. So if you know anybody who you think could contribute to public protection, nominate them, nominate yourselves, and we hope to see you at the council table. Thank you so much, everybody.